That's what God says. Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord.
Let's open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your watch care and your goodness over your people. We want to ask and pray that you would be with us, bless us and guide us. Help us in our study this evening to honour you and to glorify you as this day comes to its end and we begin a new Sabbath. We want to ask for rest. We want to ask for a blessing, Father, and we ask that the Holy Spirit would come into our hearts and our minds so that we might have a clearer revelation of what your will is for your people. We ask and pray for these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Hello. So what are some of the verses that we looked at yesterday? John? So let's do it in a slightly structured way. We tend to use a lot of graphics when I do my presentations. Am I not speaking loud enough for you?
Yeah, I can't hear.
Do you want to sit at the front?
Sorry.
Please come, you can come closer.
It's okay.
You sure? I'll try and raise my voice. Have we got audio, by the way? It's good. So I tend to do our studies using pictures and diagrams. It tends to help people understand a little clearer what we're speaking about. So this line here represents, what does it represent? It represents the work that needs to be done. Yeah? So let's put this down. This is the work. So when I say this is the work, this work can be expressed in different ways, depending on who you're referring to, who's doing the work. So if this was the work of God, what is this work? Spreading the gospel. He wants to get his people ready. And if this was us, what would it be? Spreading the gospel. It's the same thing. It's not much difference. Yeah? But the problem is, when God is going to be giving the gospel, his perspective is slightly different than our perspective. So I'm sure you all, perhaps you don't all, I don't know, do door-to-door work or try to share, if I could just say, the message, maybe the message of Christianity or Adventism or the Sabbath truth, depending on how you view it. Perhaps you spend your time sharing that message to people who aren't Adventist, or we might call them the world. So this would be the work that you're doing, yeah? The work that you're doing is spreading the gospel. But when God looks at the problem, his perspective is slightly different than our perspective. And that's what we discussed yesterday, if you remember. So when we're thinking about doing work, how long are you allowed to work for? So remember that there are 24 hours in a day. So it begins at 1 o'clock here and it goes all the way around to 12, but then it goes all the way around again, doesn't it? Yeah? So how many hours in a day? 24. And we know that the day began in the evening, in the morning, or the night, and then the day. So a day is split into two parts, night and day. And what are we supposed to do at night? We're supposed to sleep at night, aren't we? And what are we supposed to do during the day? Work. Okay. So that's where we began to think about this work. So if you've got 24 hours and you split between night and day, how long are we supposed to work for? 12 hours. We split the day into night and day, so it'd be 12 and 12. So the day is 12 hours. And what Bible verse did we look at to show that there are 12 hours in a day and that we're supposed to work? It was from Revelation 18. Perry told us the book. What book did you tell us? Book of John. So we're going to go to the book of John. So who took good notes yesterday? Joshua, did you take good notes?
Not good enough.
I got John here, but I didn't get the verse.
Okay, so we're going to fill in all the gaps. Catherine, did you get the...
Was it John 4?
Wasn't John 4?
John 1.
There's a 4 in it. Brother James.
John 9:4.
John 9:4. Good. Have you found it?
Pardon me?
Did you find the verse? John 9:4?
I don't have my Bible.
Oh.
Oh, duh, she just gave me one a little bit ago. Sorry.
Sister Karina, did you find it?
Yes.
See, could you read that to us then?
I must work the works of him who sent me. While it is day, the night is coming when no one can work.
Okay, so it says that we're only allowed to work during the day. So this line, how long would it be? 12 hours, wouldn't it? 12 hours. And then we went to where? Oh, okay, before we do that, so this is the beginning of the day and this is the end of the day, where there's no more work to do. So we could mark, this is the end, and this is the beginning. Where does that phrase come from, the beginning and the end?
Alpha and Omega?
The Alpha and the Omega. Where would you find that?
In the beginning
In the beginning?
of the Bible.
The phrase itself, Alpha and Omega. It's not in the book of Genesis, I don't believe.
Revelation
In the book of Revelation,
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
fine.
20.
Chapter 1. Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I think it's chapter 1. Let's check if Perry's right.
What are you looking at? Scriptures on paper. Scriptures on paper. It's on
Where did you go to, Perry? You wanted to go to Revelation?
I don't know.
What chapter did you just say? He didn't go to chapter 1, he went to chapter 20 something.
22.
22, verse 13. You did well. Very good. So we'll go to Revelation 1:8. In fact, I'll give you all the verses. It's Revelation 1:8 and 11, 21:6 and 12:13. So Jesus calls himself the Alpha and the Omega. So we'll do that. Alpha and the Omega. What does that mean? So we've got beginning and the end. But what does God mean when he calls himself the Alpha and the Omega? Okay, so it means first and last. But what does it actually mean when beyond just being the first and the last? Eternal. Anyone else?
Everything between.
Everything in between. Anyone else? Let's go to the Old Testament then. Let's go to the book of Isaiah. Chapter 46. And so it's Isaiah chapter 46. This was all Revelation. There's a number of passages we could go to, but we'll just go to the one in Isaiah. So Isaiah 46 verse 10. Corinne, could you read that? Catherine, sorry, could you read that?
Verse 16?
Yeah, verse 10, sorry. There isn't a verse 16, I don't think.
Oh, yeah. Declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure.
Okay, so what does this verse mean if it says declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done? So I want us to think about what those words mean, because often when we read the scriptures, we just read them and it says end from the beginning, sounds like Alpha and Omega, similar to Revelation, and it talks about the ancient times, talks about his counsel. But I want us to try and understand what those words actually mean. How do we read those words? Because I don't know if we're all reading the King James Version, but if we are, sometimes the wording isn't that straightforward. So I want us to try and think about what that actual, at least the first part of it. We'll go up to the first comma. It says declaring the end from the beginning, and then it's going to say from ancient times the things that are not yet done.
What's prophesied?
What's prophesied? So explain how you see that in these words.
Well,
Which bit are you reading to see that?
things that are not yet done, and
Okay.
will be done.
hmm So where is God standing then? If you're going to say that in the context of this verse, where would God be?
Well,
On this
he'll be
line.
at the beginning, he'll be there at the end.
So he's here at the beginning,
Uh-huh.
okay, and what's he doing? According to what the verse, how you're reading that verse, what's he doing at the beginning?
Declaring the end from the beginning.
But I want you to say what that means, because you're just telling me what the verse says.
There's going to be an end.
Okay, so he's standing here, and God is saying, by the way, there's going to be an end somewhere down the line. Yeah? Anything else you get from the verse? Do we all agree with that? He's here. Is he at the beginning?
No.
He's here at the beginning, and he says, by the way, there's going to be an end somewhere down the road.
That there's going to be all kinds of things happening before the end.
He says that in this verse? No, in this verse. I don't think he says that in the verse.
Well, from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying my counsel shall stand and I will do all my pleasure.
Okay, so he's here at the beginning. Is that where you're placing God? In this verse?
He created the earth,
And he's declaring the end.
right?
Yeah? So where's the ancient times? If God is here, where's the ancient times?
The ancient times were in the beginning, right?
Right here? So I want you to, I'm going to write ancient times. I'll put AT for ancient times. Tell me where to put ancient times on this.
I'm getting confused now. I mean, I thought I was going to, but it's not coming out right.
Oh, no, please work through it. It's fine. Because sometimes when we look at these verses, and say someone like me pushes you to say, I want you to really tell me what you think this verse means. Sometimes we can become tongue-tied because we're not perhaps used to it. So don't feel shy. God's here, and it says he's going to declare the end, which means he's going to tell you that there's an end, and then it says something about ancient times. So I'm just wondering where you'd put the ancient times if God was here. You should put it here, or maybe back. I'm just trying to understand how you'd conceptualize the verse. Anyone else?
I was going to say it's between the beginning and the end, because only God knows what is in between. From what when I heard what she said, she was saying things that are not yet to come.
Where's that? Is that, or is that the ancient times, the things that are not yet to?
That's prior. That's ahead. Ahead. Prior would be ancient, which is that, right?
Okay, so where would you put ancient times?
Before the beginning.
So you'd put it back here, ancient times. So I'll put AT like this. Before the beginning?
Before the end.
Oh yeah, the end's here.
Yes.
But I want you to tell me where to put ancient times. So if it's not here, tell me where to put ancient times. In the middle. You want to put it in the middle. Okay. So I'm going to ask you why in a second, after Sister Karina's given me her thoughts.
Let Ellen go ahead.
Okay.
No, I think it's before before the end, all that stuff. Things are going to happen. So ancient times would be in between. I think.
Okay.
It says, remember for the verse above it about the things of old. So I think that would be. It wouldn't be in the beginning. It would be in between there because of the. What it says, thinking of remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is no one like me. So
Anyone else? Okay, so let me suggest a couple of things then, perhaps, to guide us a bit further down the way.
Well, ancient times, it's got to be in time, right? So beginning was beginning of time. Ancient times was towards the beginning of time, but it wasn't before time existed.
Okay.
And then things that have not yet come, they're not past the end of time, but they're still in time, but they're towards the end of time. So ancient times would be towards the left of the diagram, but after beginning.
Okay. Why after the beginning?
See, I don't know. I don't know that answer.
Okay.
Maybe it's at the same time.
So if I said this, how would you finish that phrase? Who knows how to finish that phrase? Repeat and
Rinse.
sorry.
And rinse.
Repeat and rinse. You said rinse. Is that what you said?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Thinking of laundry.
Okay.
Rinse and repeat is usually how
Okay. Enlarge.
Yes.
Has everybody heard of this phrase?
Yes.
Not very often.
Not very often.
Just a new phrase.
What would this mean to you, Sister Corinne, if I said repeat and enlarge? What's the first word mean?
Repeat is to take and, I guess, look back or do something again.
So it means do it again. And what does it mean to enlarge upon something?
Make it bigger, expound.
Expound. Does everybody know what the word expound means? To say the same thing but in more detail. Doesn't mean it might not mean improve. So if I said repeat and enlarge, it would mean saying the same thing again, but you're going to expound upon it or give more details. Yeah?
The Hebrew is really good at that.
Yeah.
Really
or the Jews, and what are we?
We're spiritual Jews.
We're spiritual Jews. So we should be good at this technique, shouldn't we? Yeah? So I want to suggest that this verse, at least the first half of the verse, is a repeat and enlarge. And if you can see it as a repeat and enlarge, if you can read into the verse as you see the structure of it, the verse will explain itself. So there's two rules that this verse can teach us. One of them is to look for repeat and enlargements, because you see this often in the verses. As you say, when you say the Jews were good at this, remember this is just the word of God. So it's not so much the Jews were good at it, it means it's actually that God was good at it. Because God instructed them what to write, and they just they write what he tells them. So God has given this rule to us to help us to understand. It's like a key. If you can get this key, and it happens literally hundreds of times in the scriptures, if you can see it and look out for it, it helps you to understand what it's saying. So the first one is repeat and enlarge. And what did I say the second one is? What did I just say? I did it really quickly. The Bible does what? Brother James?
Interprets itself.
Yeah. The Bible interprets itself. Catherine, what does that mean to you? In this example,
It seems like it has a contradiction or something. It will tell you in other verses.
okay. So,
Really
what were we trying to? Did everybody know what the beginning means? And everybody knows what the end means. But what were we struggling on? Okay, so we don't know what ancient times mean. So we had this little discussion about what ancient times means. Where are we going to find the answer? The Bible interprets itself. So the Bible will teach us what ancient times means. So we could have a couple of options. We could type the word ancient times if you have an online computer or a phone or something, or a concordance, and we could find all the verses that dealt with it. But I want to suggest if we just stick with these two rules, we'll see that the verse itself will define what ancient times are. Okay? So I want to say this. So this is 46:10, and I'm going to say the first part of the verse. Where would we end the first part of the verse?
At the comma.
At the comma, yes.
Okay? So I'll put a comma here, and I'm going to call this A. And then we've got the next part of the verse, which I'll call B. And I'm going to say that ends at the comma. So I'm saying that A equals B. Does that make sense, Sister Karina? I'm going to explain the words bit of it, but just the structure of that. I'm saying 46:10. There's not the whole of the verse. There's words afterwards, but there's A and a B, and A equals B because it's a repeat and enlargement, and the Bible's going to interpret itself. So what does the first part say? What does A say? Declaring the end from the beginning. So I'm going to put end. So it says end from beginning. Okay? Before we move on any further, we've got two rules here. Yeah? I'm going to give you a third one. There's another rule that's already in this verse. And if you can see these rules or these principles that are embedded in the scripture, it really helps you to understand that the Bible does interpret itself, and the Bible isn't a mystery that we might think it is. So I'm going to skip down. Let me try and squeeze it in here. So there's the number 3. So I'll give it a simple name, but then I'll give it the technical name. A mirror. What is a mirror? A looking glass or a reflection. Yeah? So I want to draw a little schematic of what this reflection looks like. So we've all done this because we all went to school, yes? Well, I say yes because we don't. We went to school. Yeah.
It's a long time ago.
So there's a piece of paper, and we're going to fold the piece of paper in half. Yeah, you just get a piece of paper like this, and you fold it in half. Then you open it back up, and you get a paintbrush, and you make a mark like that in black, and you make a mark in red. Now, you said you went to school a long time ago. What we're going to do next, because you know, I know you remember. What you're going to do next?
Fold the paper in half again.
You're going to fold it in half again. Why? What's going to happen when you fold it in half?
Make a copy.
You're going to make a copy. So what will it look like? Where will this, when you fold it in half and you press it, you're going to make a copy of this side into this side. Because your teacher wanted to teach you about mirrors or reflections. Yeah? So it's what you do in kindergarten at maths. So where would the black dot go?
Top and right.
Top and right, okay? That would look like that. And the red,
Bottom right.
bottom right?
No, right next to the
Okay, so it go here.
fold.
So we can all see that, yes?
Yeah.
So it teaches us about reflection. So we could put this like this, and this like this. Yes? So we're going to see that this A here is in two parts. And I'm going to call this, let me call it A and B. And I'm going to change this to B. Let me call that like that, B. Okay? So I've got A and B. So I'm going to put this here. Here's A, and here's B. Can we see that? So once you make the mirror, where would the B be on this side? Here?
Bottom left.
Bottom left?
On the left side.
If let me put it this way. Here's the B, and here's the A. So this B, once it gets folded, where would it be on this side?
Closer to the fold.
It'd be here? Not the actual letter B, because this letter B is the dot. I'm talking about the dot itself. So would the B be here? Yeah? So this would be the B, and this would be the A. Can we see that? I'm not talking about the position of the letters. I'm just identifying the dot. The dot is the A. So if the A's up here, the A would be here, and the B would be here, and the B's here. Yeah? Okay. So I'm going to redo this. So I'm going to say A and B. It's going to look like, what would be the first one? B and A. So it looks like this. That's this one here, and that's this one here. Can we see that? Was that all a bit complicated? Isaiah, did that make sense to you? Yep. Okay, so we've got A and B and B. It's going to follow this structure. So we're going to pull it all over here, and this third rule is called a mirroring rule, or the other name it has that people use when they're studying the scriptures is called chiasms, or chiastic structures, or patterns. Has anybody heard of the word chiasms or chiastic structures? You've probably heard of them before. So all they are just mirroring or reflections. So I'm suggesting in this verse there's a mirroring or a reflection that's going on. It's not just a repeat and enlarge. It's not just the Bible interpreting itself. It's also a chiasm or a mirroring. So it's going to say A and B, and I'll put a line down here, and it's going to be a B and an A. So in the first part of the verse, part A, it says, declaring the end from the beginning, and then there's a comma. So what's the B called? Because it doesn't say end in the beginning. What's the phrase that's used here?
Ancient times.
Ancient times. I'll put AT. And then what's this one over here?
Things that are not yet done.
Okay, so I'm just going to say not yet. Can everybody see that in the verse? Yeah? Sister Teresa, does that make a little bit of sense? All to you?
Oh, yeah.
Good.
Do I look like a dunce? I mean,
No.
sit here. I didn't mean to say that, but do I?
No.
I didn't mean to be rude, I'm sorry.
No, no.
Because I was going to ask you a question if that made sense. So if that makes sense, I'm going to ask you this. I'm going to say beginning equals what? It's B, but equals what? Let me put the equals here. Teresa, what would begin equal on this side?
I'm afraid to answer.
Please don't. It doesn't matter if you're wrong. Because this is the B, and it would be the B on this side. So what would you say it would be? I've only got a choice of two, that one or that one.
This one hasn't happened yet.
Okay, I want to suggest that the beginning is the ancient times. Because the A's are going to match up, and the B's are going to match up. Just like we did here. And so the beginning would be the ancient times, and the end would be the things that are not yet. Can we all see that? So someone put the ancient times up here. Where should the ancient times go? Right here. So this is the ancient times, and this is the things that are not yet. That makes sense. So even in a relatively simple verse, I want us to see that there's some level of complexity there, or structure, or patterns. That if you can see the patterns, some of the things that perhaps we're not too sure about, like what does ancient times even mean? The verse will actually tell us what it means. So, okay, we've done that now. So we've got some structure. We've got most of the verse done actually. So I want to go back to the phrase. It says declaring the end from the beginning. So I want us to try and think, what does that phrase mean, declaring the end from the beginning? What is God trying to tell us in this verse? Because he's here at the beginning, isn't he? At the ancient times. He's here at the ancient times. And he says, the end is coming. Yeah? So when we spoke about end, this is prophesying, isn't it? It's all about prophecy. So here's prophesying. Where's he prophesying actually? At the beginning. He's doing his prophecy here. So he's doing some prophecy. And he's saying the end is coming. And what is the end?
When we finish work.
When we finish work.
At the end of the day.
So what's going to happen at the end? What's going to happen at the end? What do we know about end times prophecy?
Jesus is coming.
Jesus is coming. And when he comes, what's he going to do? Everybody? Okay, so that we can put judgment here. I'll put J for judgment. And when he brings judgment, how many groups will there be? Two groups. Which two groups would they be? Good and bad?
Yeah, more or less.
What's he going to do with the good ones?
Take him to heaven.
And the bad ones?
They're going to sleep till he comes back.
Or he's going to destroy them?
Destroy them.
Yeah. So how do you know he's going to do that?
He tells us that.
He tells us that. And how do we know what it looks like? How do you know what it's going to look like?
He tells us that too.
So let's go to Matthew. Matthew chapter 24. So Matthew chapter 24 is going to use this principle. So we're going to go back to Isaiah 46. So we'll go to Matthew 24, verse 37. Sister Wendy, could you read that? Oh, we're not all there yet. Go ahead.
But as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be.
Okay, could you explain that verse for us?
The things that were happening in Noah's time will also be happening at the end of time before Jesus comes.
Okay, so the end, which isn't here yet, the end of the world, we've said that's when Jesus is coming. If we want to know what it's going to look like, what does this verse say? It's going to look like,
What was happening before Noah?
or if you use,
Before the flood.
if we use Isaiah 46 language, what would it look like? Look like the beginning or the ancient times. So you've just said the end, when Jesus comes, it's going to look like the beginning. What's it going to look like at the end, according to this verse? From what we know about Noah, what's it going to look like?
Married.
Okay, it's going to tell us in the next verse.
Yes.
It's going to tell us in the next verse. Prairie, you're saying
Eating and drinking.
eating,
Married.
drinking, and we did about marriage this morning, didn't we? Yeah. Eating, drinking, marrying. Anything else? So let's read 38. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noe entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So what else? There's eating, drinking, marrying, and what else does it say? Okay, so I've just got the marriage there, giving marriage, marrying and giving in marriage, the big one. Okay, so it says he enters into the ark. Why? Why is he going to enter into the ark? What's coming? Flood. So what are you expecting at the end of the world? A flood. Okay, so we're expecting a flood. We okay with that? So, how do you know all that's going to happen at the end of the world? Because it happened at the beginning of the world. Yeah? So all of those things we could put here. So what does God do? He judges the world. And how many people are saved? 8. And the eating, drinking, and marrying, and they're all going to be destroyed by the flood. So let's go back to Isaiah 46. So God says, declaring 24, 37, and 38. So I'll write that down. Matthew 24, 37, and 38. So Isaiah 46:10, declaring the end from the beginning. So what does that verse mean now, that little phrase, declaring the end from the beginning? Jesus is here, God's here, and he's saying, the end is coming. And what's the end going to look like? It's going to look like eating, drinking, and all the flood. It's going to look like that. So when it says declaring the end from the beginning, what does that phrase mean, from the beginning? When he says, I'm going to declare the end.
It's like a copy. It's going to be
Copy. So God isn't just saying, I'm going to tell you that the end is coming. Because anybody can do that. Anyone can tell you that the end's coming. That's not what makes God special. How do you know who the true God is?
Gives you descriptions of what's to come. Tells you detail.
He tells you what's going to happen, but so do false prophets. False prophets will tell you what's going to happen. So how do you know the false ones from the true ones? According to this principle. prophecies come to pass, but it's more than that. It's more than that. It says declaring the end from the beginning, and we have got all of this. So I'm going to prophesy now. I'm going to make a prophecy that at the end of the world, it's going to look like this. So how do you know I'm right?
Because God says it. It says in that verse, I will do all my pleasure.
Okay?
That's not like,
But how do you know I'm right if I say it's going to, the end of the world's going to look like this? We just read it in Matthew 24.
because
Because he's
already
already done it in the first place. So what?
But there's not going to be another flood.
Oh, I'm going to explain to you about that flood. I'll explain about the flood.
because there are rainbows.
So what I want to suggest this verse is teaching us is that if you want to know who the true God is, and if we read all the verses around this, in fact, the 5 chapters before, the whole argument that Isaiah is having is God's people have gone into apostasy. And in this apostasy, they've taken up the idols of the world. And what do idols normally do? They prophesy. False prophecies. Obviously not literally they're idols, but they're prophets or they're false priests. So they're going to give a false prophecy. Does everybody know, or does anybody know when Isaiah is alive? Who's reigning? Who's the king that's reigning when Isaiah is alive? Do we know?
Hezekiah.
It's not Hezekiah. Oh, it is Hezekiah. Yes, actually, you're right.
Hezekiah and oh yeah, just like me.
Was it Ahab before?
Who was Hezekiah's lovely son? The one that he wanted the son.
Isaiah prayed for him.
Sorry?
Isaiah prayed for him.
He prayed for him and he healed.
Oh, it starts with a J.
Starts with an M.
Oh,
What? Oh.
Almost. Manasseh. So we've got Hezekiah and Manasseh. And what does Manasseh do to Isaiah? Kills him. He chops him in half. Literally, he chopped him in half. So Manasseh's going to... Sorry?
No, Hezekiah's son.
Hezekiah's son Manasseh did. Yeah. So Manasseh is the one, he reigns, Isaiah's ministry is mostly in the time period of Manasseh. And he's giving them a warning. So he's telling them what God is about to do and what is God about to do to the whole nation
carry him away captive.
into Babylon. Remember the story of Daniel? Yeah? Daniel's about to come a few years down, about 100 years afterwards. Daniel's around here, and Nebuchadnezzar's going to rise up and he's going to destroy the nation. And God is already warning them 100 years before, plus. And are the people going to believe? No. You're going to get false prophets raising up, and they're going to be saying,
Peace and safety.
peace and safety. Nothing's going to happen. It's all going to be okay. So God is going to counter this argument in these chapters, chapter 41, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, these 6 chapters. And he's going to say this, the argument that God's going to offer you is if you want to know who the true God is, he's going to tell you what the future holds. And not only what the future holds, because everybody can predict the future. Yeah? I'm going to predict that within the next 5 years we're going to have a stock market crash. Yeah? So am I a good prophet? Why?
You didn't go into detail about it.
Yeah, because you know there's going to be a stock market crash in the next 5 years. There always are, yeah? So we need to know some details. In fact, I was a good prophet actually, because the reason I know there's going to be one is because there have been ones in the past. So I was a good prophet. So God's going to say, if you want to know who the true God is, me or the idols, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen in the future. So he's going to tell them what's going to happen in the future. But when he tells you what's going to happen in the future, that future is controlled by what? The ancient times. He says whatever's going to happen in the future, it's already happened. And that's the earmark of the true God. The reason we know that we serve the true God as opposed to false gods is that the predictions that we're making have already happened in the past. And in fact, all of end time prophecy is just a copy of what's happened in the past. And it's a really important principle for us to understand. That's how you know if you're making mistakes about what's going to happen at the end of the world. So, one example that we got from Matthew 24 is that Jesus says the end of the world is going to look like the beginning. The story of Noah is here and here. Yeah? So Perry told us that it's eating, drinking, marrying, etc. That's what the problem was at the beginning. And that's what it's going to be like at the end of the world. Okay? But let's look at the story of Noah a little bit more. Here's Noah's Ark. And it's built now. So there's a ramp here, and there's doors open, and here's Noah. And how long's he been preaching for? 120 years. So we'll put 120 here. Why is 120 important? I don't look that way.
3 generations.
Okay, 3 generations. So the only reason I'm asking is because we looked at this yesterday, but we looked at it differently. Okay, remember we spoke about, so I'll give you the clue. It looks like this. What did we speak about when we did that?
Oh, the grain.
The grain. And we looked for?
Green
And white. And what verse was that?
John 4. 30, 35.
Just go to John 4 once.
35.
Yeah. So let's read that.
Say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh the harvest. Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes, and look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest.
So how long? 4 months. So we're all familiar. Very good. So we're all familiar with Numbers and Ezekiel.
Yeah.
And I'll give you this one, Ezekiel 4:6. And what's this one, Numbers?
14:34.
And what do these verses teach us?
Day for a year principle.
Okay, 1 day equals 1 year. Is everybody familiar with that? Yeah? And we use this principle extensively in our Bible studies. Yeah? And often when we're dealing with this subject, we're dealing with the prophecy of the 1260. You're familiar with that? The Dark Ages, we might call it. And it's expressed in different ways, isn't it, this prophecy? What are the different ways that it's expressed? It's expressed as 1260. How else is it expressed?
40 something months.
42 months.
Time times.
Good. 3.5 times. And when we say 3.5 times, what do we say that time is?
It's 1 year.
A year. So we say it's 3.5 years. So I'm going to change T to years. So we say it's 3.5 years. Yeah? And to do this calculation, if you divided 1260 by 42, it will tell you how many days in 1 month. 1 month is how many days? 30 days. So we're all familiar with that, yes? And once you get this, you can do all these calculations. So when God created the earth, the very beginning, We knew this. We know the sun and the moons were to control the days and the seasons, and 1 month was 30 days. And how many days were it in? How many months in a year? 12 months. So 1 year is 12 months, and 1 year is how many days? 12 times 30. Sorry?
A year is 365 days.
How long? 300 and?
65. No?
Not in prophetic reckoning or biblical reckoning. If we just did that calculation, it'd be 360. It's 360 days. Because if you did 365 and did 3.5 of those, it wouldn't come out at 1260. It'd come out a slightly higher number. Yeah? So is everybody familiar with that? So I want to pick this one here. Why do I want to pick that? Because we're here. 4 months. So how many days is 4 months?
120.
How many days Noah was preaching?
It's 120. You want to do the calculation? 30 days times 4 months. Yeah? Okay, so you can see there's a connection between Noah's preaching for 120 years and Jesus saying this 120 or 120 days, a day for a year. So there's a connection between John 4:35 and the preaching of Noah. So we can see that connection. So I just want to say one thing. Jesus is talking about the time period when he's alive and what's about to happen in AD 34 or in AD 70, depending what year you're looking at. What's about to happen to the Jewish nation? Judgment. And who's going to come to destroy them? Rome. Pagan Rome is going to come and destroy that nation. Yes? We're all familiar with that? Okay, so pagan Rome's going to destroy this nation in this history. So you know that the end in this history here, or in Jesus' history, is being prefigured in this history. There's a relationship between the story of Noah and the story of Christ, and we're going to see that in a moment. Yeah? Okay. So I had the flood here. And Sister Teresa said, well, there's not going to be a flood, a literal flood at the end of the world. Okay? So I want us to see something when we're looking at the word flood. So let's go to the book of Daniel. I'm going to go to Daniel chapter 9. So are we all familiar with the story of Daniel chapter 9, the prophecy that it's about?
Yes.
Yeah? Is everybody familiar with it? Or some of us at least? Perhaps not all of us. What's the major prophecy, my brother? So I forgot your name at the back. Manny? Manny? What's the prophecy of Daniel chapter 9?
Build and restore Jerusalem.
You can either give me the length or just the concept or the idea.
King Darius, where it begins.
Okay? Anyone else?
Build and restore Jerusalem.
Build and restore Jerusalem. Sorry?
I said praise for the people.
Praise
Praise
for his people. I'm thinking about the prophecy of Daniel chapter 9.
Kingdoms that are going to be destroyed and some that are brought up.
Okay?
70 weeks.
So it says in verse 25, oh no, we'll go to verse 24. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish their transgression, to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. And then in verse 25 it talks about the Messiah coming, and it says, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And I'm going to drop down to verse 27. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. In the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. So that's reasonably familiar territory for Adventists generally. So let's just draw that out. Where does it begin? How long is it first? Verse 24. 70 weeks. And when does it begin? The going forth of the decree. Verse 25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment. So I'll put go forth of the commandment. And when did that happen? Do you know what year that happened?
457.
Good. I'll just put minus for BC. 457 BC. And the prophecy split into 3 parts. What's the first? How long is the first part?
7 weeks.
7 weeks. The next part?
62 weeks.
And the next part?
1 week.
1 week. So we're familiar with that prophecy? And it says 70 weeks are determined or cut off. Yeah, the word determined means cut off. What's it cut off from?
It's 2300-day prophecy.
Do we all know that? If we're not familiar with that? That there's a 2300-year prophecy, which is Daniel 8:14, and this bit has been cut off from that. In fact, you need chapter 9 to actually understand where to begin the 2300 days. It's from the going forth of the decree. In fact, it's not from chapter 9 verse 1 where it talks about the first year of Darius. It doesn't begin in the first year of Darius. It's a long time after that, many years after Darius was reigning. So you get to this decree. Do we know who the king was that decreed this one? Artaxerxes. So I'll put A for Artaxerxes. See? Yes. So this is Artaxerxes. We spoke earlier about the 7 thunders. Remember?
Yeah.
So who comes after Darius? Anybody? Cyrus. He's anointed. So let's start counting. Cyrus. Maybe we don't know. Cyrus. Cambyses. Smerdis. Darius. Xerxes. Artabanus. And Artaxerxes. 7 Persian kings. So you have 7 Persian kings, and 7 Persian kings are symbol of the 7 thunders. It's one example of 7 thunders, which might not make sense to many of us. So, because we were talking about that earlier. So here's the going forth of the decree. I just want to bring that to view here. So when this happens, we're in the 70th week, or the 69th week really. Yeah, so we're in the 69th week here, and then it's going to go to the 70th, and it says in the midst of the week, what happened? Christ dies. So do we know these 3 dates? Or the years? Do you know what year Christ dies? 31. And this one is where he begins his ministry. Do you know? When he's baptized. It's 3.5 years long. 27, good. And this one? 34. And what's marked here? We did this yesterday. The stoning of Stephen. And then when Stephen stones, what's Jesus going to do? And when he stands up, it means it is finished. Close of probation, or the end. So it's the end. So we've got close of probation here, or an end for the Jewish nation. So the reason why I mentioned all of that is because 34, you could go to AD 70. What's going to happen? What is Rome going to do? They're going to come and destroy. Okay, so here, Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. So we're in chapter 9, so let's read this. And after 80, verse 26, after 82 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people, so we've read that already. Now I have to read the second part of the verse. So let's read this bit. We didn't read this. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city. Brother Manny, who's going to destroy Jerusalem? You told us a moment ago. No, not in. It's not Darius. We're in the time of Christ now. The Messiah has just been killed, and Stephen has been stoned, and now Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. Who destroys Jerusalem in this history? The Pope isn't around yet. Rome. This is pagan Rome, the Caesars. Yes? So when it says the people of the prince, that's talking about pagan Rome and his army. They're going to destroy, it says destroy the city. So what city are they going to come and destroy? Jerusalem. Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. Did it get literally destroyed? Yep, it got literally destroyed. It got razed to the ground in AD 70, literally. You can see that in Desire of Ages, chapter 1. But let's read on. It says, and destroy the city and the sanctuary, the temple. And it says, and the end thereof. What does the word thereof mean in plain English? Thereof. The end thereof. Thereof means it. It's as simple as that. So let's put the word it there. And the end of it, which is, what is the it? What is the it? What is the it?
The end of the city.
The city. It is the city. So it says, and the end of the city, or the destruction of the city, shall be with a flood. So what does it begin with? Who begins to destroy the city? Brother Manny just told us. Which Rome? Pagan Rome begins to destroy Jerusalem. So it begins with pagan Rome, the people of the prince, and what does it end with? In the verse, a flood. So you tell me what a flood is then. You tell me what a flood is.
Doctrines, false doctrines.
Doctrines? Whose false doctrines?
It
Whose?
would be papal.
Not pagans
Papal
Rome.
Rome.
Papal Rome. It begins with pagan Rome and it ends with papal Rome. So this flood that's been spoken about is a symbol of what? The papacy. Okay, so let's put so the flood is the papacy. What do we know about what's going to happen at the end of the world? It's going to persecute. They're going to rule. And when papacy is going to rule, what do we teach it's going to do? Across the whole world. It's going to enforce a Sunday law, which is the mark of the beast, or the mark of its authority. So the world was destroyed with a flood at the beginning, and the world is going to be destroyed at the end with a flood. But it's not a literal water flood. This flood is the papacy. If we're not sure about that, let's go to Revelation chapter 12. And we're going to see this same flood brought to view again. Chapter 12, verse 15. It says, and the serpent. Who's the serpent? Satan. Yes? Is that everybody said Satan?
Yes.
But it's not really Satan. It's Satan that's been represented by people, yeah, or powers or governments, the papacy. Let's go back to verse 14. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished. Who's this woman that's being nourished? The church. Good church or bad church? Good church. She's God's people. And how long is she nourished for? So the 3.5 times, which is the 12/6, the Dark Ages. So we're in the Dark Ages. And who's she being protected from? It says, from the face of the serpent. So who's this serpent? Papacy. Can we see it's the papacy? Next verse. And the serpent, or the papacy, look what it does. Cast out of his mouth water. Yes? The flood. Water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood, to be destroyed by the flood. So how were the people destroyed here? By the flood. And the papacy wants God's people to be destroyed by the flood. And this destruction is happening in the 1260. So that tells you that you've got a beginning and the end. So we know all about the 1260 from this history here. But the 1260 is also a beginning for us. So if you want to know what's going to happen at the end of the world, you know, all you need to do is go back to the beginning. What year did the 1260 begin? 538. And as soon as the papacy rises up in 538, what's the first thing it does? It makes a Sunday law. Makes a Sunday law at the very first year when it begins to reign supremely. So what does that tell you? If that was an alpha, what does it tell you at the omega is going to happen? As soon as the papacy begins to rule or reign, what's she going to do? And make a Sunday law. How can she reign? Because she's a woman. And women can't reign. Because only kings can reign. She has to marry a king. And when she marries the king, how long are they going to be married for? For 1 hour. Remember? Going to be married for 1 hour. So we spoke about this yesterday. So you can see how this principle of Alpha and Omega is so important for us to understand. And what I want us to see is that if you want to understand about end time prophecy, you need to know all about the ancient times, because they're going to teach you some really important truths. Shall we have a break, or are we okay to go? It's 5:15. Shall we have a break? Or? Yeah. So let's have a break. But before we break, let's summarise. What we're saying is that we're only allowed to work for 12 hours because we're only allowed to work in the daytime. And we found that in John chapter 9, verse 4. So we saw in John 9:4 that you're only allowed to work in the daytime. And how many hours are there in a day? In the whole, just in the day bit of it. So we've got 12 hours you're allowed to work. So this is our structure. Then we saw that the day begins and the day ends here. Then we went to Isaiah 46:10, and we saw how that verse was structured. And it's important to see at least 3 rules that we saw here. There's a repeat and enlarge, the Bible interprets itself, and there's a chiasm, or a mirroring, or a reflection, all in that verse. And if you can see that, all of the verse makes perfect, simple sense. It's simple, it's not difficult. It says, the end from the beginning, the ancient times are going to declare what is not yet. And I think it says declared. It says, and from the ancient times, the things that are not yet done. Oh, it says declaring. You're declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times, the things that are not yet done. So we saw this structure, that the reason it says end, beginning, ancient times, not yet, or end, begin, begin, end, is that it's using this mirroring, and then it's going to use, the Bible interprets itself, it's going to tell you what ancient times means. Ancient times means the beginning, and obviously the things not yet mean the end, and it's repeat and enlarge. This bit is an enlargement or a repeat of what's happening here. So that's how we got ancient times and not yet. We had Alpha and Omega, and we got that from these passages here, Revelation 1, 21 and 22, and Isaiah 46:10. And this is how this mirroring works. So we did all of that, and then we gave an example. The example that we gave was the story of the flood. Jesus says, the end of the world is going to be like it was in the days of Noah. They were eating, drinking and marrying, and there's a flood that's going to destroy the world. So we know this is at the beginning. Then we saw that Noah's Ark takes 120 years to be built. But yesterday we studied that in John 4:35, that in this time period of these 4 months that Jesus speaks about, that the field is already ready for harvesting. But what are God's people saying? We're not ready. It's not harvest time yet. In fact, they're not saying we're not ready, they're saying they're not ready. Because who is this field that's white, ready for harvest? Who was that? This was the world. And they're saying the world isn't ready yet. But Jesus says the world is ready right now. So I want to say to you, from what we've studied so far today in 2017, for quite some time, the world is all ready to be harvested. But there's a big problem. And the big problem is us. We're the problem. And in this time when the world is white, ready for harvest, God's people are not ready. And they need to go through this time of being ready. And we saw this 4 months isn't just any old 4 months. It's not a coincidence, because 4 months is 120 days. So you know that this 120 is connected to the story of Noah, from this principle of beginning and end. So then we went into this story here in a general sense. This is a story of Christ's first advent. And in Christ's first advent, it's dealt with in Daniel chapter 9. Because in Daniel chapter 9, it talks about the 70-week prophecy, or 490 years. So 70 weeks is 490 years. We can calculate that. It's relatively straightforward using this calculation here. We know it begins in 457 BC. And here you get to a close of probation, because the city is going to be destroyed. But it says it's first going to be destroyed by the people of the prince, which was pagan Rome. So I'll say the prince is pagan Rome. It says it begins with pagan Rome and it ends with a, well, how does it say it in the verse? It ends with a flood, and the flood is papal Rome. And then we went to Revelation 12. Do you remember what verses we went to?
15.
We went to 14 and 15. So we've got 14 and 15. Because the serpent's going to persecute the woman for 1260 years, which is the papacy, and out of its mouth is going to come what? Water. And this water is like a flood, which takes you all the way back to the story of Noah. So I'm saying here we have a flood, and this flood is in the time period of the Dark Ages, and the Dark Ages is the end or omega, but it also can be used now as an alpha. So what is it going to be like at the end of the world? It's going to be like it was in the... And what beginning is that? The Dark Ages. So what happens in the Dark Ages? It's going to be torture. There's going to be persecution. And what was it in the Dark Ages? Marrying. Who was marrying whom?
The French, Clovis.
So the governments of Europe, the kings, were marrying the papacy. And what's the papacy's name in that time period? Do we know? Go to Revelation. And we'll close here. Revelation chapter 2. And we'll go to verse 20. 2:20. Revelation 2:20. What's the papacy's name? Jezebel. And we've heard of Jezebel? Who did Jezebel marry? Ahab. Do we all know that? And what did they have between them? There was Jezebel and Ahab. And on Mount Carmel, you had the prophets of Baal. Okay? So now you know that the story of the Dark Ages is connected with the story of Elijah, because it's called Jezebel. Jezebel's married Ahab, and Ahab is a king of a country, and she's a woman or a church. In fact, she's the high priest of, what's her name? Jezebel. Jezebel. So she's the high priest of Baal, high priestess. So it's got a church and a state marrying. So what do you know is going to happen at the end of the world? Church and state. So when you go to the story of Noah, there's church and state. There's going to be a flood. And we could go all into the eating and drinking. So what are we going to be? What's Jezebel, Mystery Babylon, got in her hand at the end of the world? Cup. And it's full of wine. And that wine is a symbol of her doctrines. So is there drinking at the end of the world? For sure. So you've got the drinking and eating. Isaiah. Oh, we should finish, sorry. I keep on doing this, doing the summary. Isaiah chapter 4. Verse 1. Isaiah 4 verse 1. Read that.
I loved it. And in that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by thy name, to take away our reproach.
So, who is a woman?
Church.
And what's the number 7 a symbol of? Sabbath, which is it completes the week, or it perfects the week. So it's a symbol of completion or perfection. So when it says 7 women, and the women is a church, how many churches is that? All of the churches are going to go to this one man, whoever the man is, and they're going to say, we will eat our own bread. So is there eating at the beginning? And there's eating at the end. But God's people eat as well. We weren't talking about that. So all I'm saying is that there's eating at the end of the world, there's drinking, there's marrying, and there's a flood. All the components that are in the story of Noah are all happening at the end. But they're not literal. They're literal here, but they become symbolic. And that's what we all want to understand. Another rule is it's first literal, first the natural, then the spiritual. First, all of these symbols happen in real life, and then they all have to be applied in a symbolic or spiritual sense, because we're not going to have literal things. And I think that's all we covered. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness. We thank you for your mercy. We ask and pray that you would be with us and guide us. Bless us, Lord, so that we might have a clearer understanding of what is going to happen at the end of the world. We ask and pray for a blessing in Jesus' name. Amen.